There's a very interesting article in the current issue of The New Yorker, and fairly in-depth interview with David Petraeus. Let's remember, David Petraeus is the 4-star general, now retired. He was in the military almost 40 years. He became perhaps the most famous military leader, at least not counting if we go back to World War II. And he was placed initially by Bush in charge of all troops in Iraq. Then a little bit later, he was appointed by Obama to be in charge of all troops in Afghanistan. And then he retired from the military a few years ago. Now, here's Petraeus. Now, this is a guy who's been in the field. And even though he's thought to be a kind of a careerist general, someone who's sort of committed to American involvements abroad, nevertheless, you do have a sober guy who does understand commando warfare, who's seen it in the field, and whose views are for this reason worth at least paying some attention to. Now, the first thing that comes out of the Petraeus interview is a flat-out refutation of Biden's claim that this is Trump's fault. Because what Petraeus says is, he goes, listen, no, this is not about whether to withdraw. It's about the manner of the withdrawal. And he goes, first of all, there were 2,500 troops in Iraq. And he says these were not frontline troops. There were very few casualties in Afghanistan because these troops were in a support function. What does that mean? They were providing, he calls them advise and assist units. Many of them were located at the headquarters in the Bagram Air Force Base. They were liaison teams. They were tactical air controllers. So a lot of what these guys did is they provided intelligence to the Afghan military. They also provided air support and air cover. And they provided kind of infrastructural help, as Petraeus puts it. So what he's getting at is that the Afghans came to rely on this. It was part of their fighting strategy, that the Afghans were like, so where's the enemy? Okay, here they are. Okay, let's go. All right, we're about to be attacked. We're about to attack them. How about a bombing raid that would help soften up the other side? So this is how the Afghans were fighting against the Taliban. And Petraeus' point is, it wasn't just that they stopped fighting. It's that a whole element, it's kind of like a football team, and you're the quarterback, and but suddenly all your receivers leave the field. And Petraeus' point is, yeah, you're going to get up and run away because you can't play anymore. Your game was reliant on this coordinated effort, and basically Biden decided to sort of pull the rug out. So Petraeus' point is, that's your fault. If you do that, you can't then just turn around and say, well, you guys are horrible. You can't play football. We trained you. No, you didn't train them to play by themselves on the field. You never did that. This is, I think, a key point. Now, so Petraeus defends the bravery of the Afghans. He goes, well, you don't say they won't fight for their country. Who do you think's been fighting for their country for the past 20 years? They have been fighting. So the problem is that we pulled out on them, and therefore they didn't feel they could fight anymore. Essentially, they believe we let them down. Now, that's worth paying attention to. Now, Petraeus goes on to say, and this I think is a little more controversial, Petraeus goes on to say that the United States does need to have a long-term presence in Afghanistan. And his reason is that, it's not really a new reason. He says, quote, if you don't keep an eye on the Islamist extremism groups, they will come back. Now, in some ways, you have to say that his prophecy is proving true, because with the United States having withdrawn, what do we see? An upsurge of confidence. I mean, here's ISIS, and you may ask, well, what's ISIS doing? Why are they doing a suicide bombing? Debbie and I were talking about that this morning, and I said, listen, for ISIS, it's a matter of a window of opportunity. They know that America's weak, America's reeling, you've got this confused guy with his head in his hands. And so ISIS goes, this is the time to strike. Besides, it's much easier for us to strike in Afghanistan than it is to strike in, say, Cincinnati. Why? Because we know the territory, we can slip in among the population, nobody recognizes us. The Taliban may be, quote, our enemies, but half of them are our allies. So the bottom line of it is we can coordinate with them to launch this kind of a devastating strike. So as I ponder this Petraeus article and these Petraeus reflections, I think to myself, look, The United States is not good at this. It's not that I disagree in principle with Petraeus that the United States can and should be a force for good in the world. My point is, if you don't know how to, don't do it. And when I look back and I think about these clueless characters like even Condoleezza Rice, or Colin Powell, George Bush. These are people with not a good understanding of how tribes operate, about tribal loyalties, about how people view things like the role of women. Remember, most of the world is very traditional, and so lecturing them about women's rights and the U.S. Embassy in Kabul flying a rainbow flag. Do you realize how ridiculous it is to do that in a Muslim country? So to do this kind of thing is to undercut your own objective. Remember that what most people in the world want is modernization, not westernization. And if you lose sight of the distinction between those two things, you try to impose westernization in the name of modernization, you end up getting a massive backlash that only ends up helping your enemy.